Good afternoon. My name is Alan Hartman. I'm a professor here. I'm the program director of Modern Foreign Languages. I'm sure you've been welcomed many times to Mercy College already, but I'd like to, on behalf of the Modern Foreign Languages program, personally welcome you all here. Not least because I think you're embodying the spirit of what we do as a program, which is understand each other, not only literally what people are saying, but culturally. Enthusiastically understanding them as a whole person. And so I think this conference is terrific. And so thank you all for being here today. I understand that we're going to be doing the program a little bit out of order. So we're going to start with Dr. Katarina Brockova, who is to my right. She'll be here momentarily. And then we'll return to the top of the program with Nabdullah, Ludin, and so on. Each presenter will have 15 minutes to present, and at the end, we'll have time for questions. Okay, and if anybody has any questions for me in the process, I'll be sitting right here to your right. Okay, so at this time, I'd like to welcome to the podium Katarina Brockova, Ph.D. She's an associate professor in the Faculty of International Relations at the University of Economics in Bratislava, Slovakia. I'm sorry, I don't have a more detailed biography for you today. If you'd like to add anything, you're very welcome to do so. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and also thank you very much for changing the order for me, because we need to catch the plane, so that is the reason today. While we were thinking about choosing the topics for today's conference, I'm here with my colleague Rudolf Kucharczyk, who spoke on the situation and the frozen conflict in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is a country that is a mere 500 kilometers away from my country. We wanted to point out a situation that is actually currently present in the Central Europe, although fortunately we have no ethno-religious conflicts going on at the moment, and hopefully also not in the future. But still, there are some trends that are visible in our country and in Europe as a whole, and most probably also in other parts of the world that tend to be or seem to be quite dangerous in terms of potential ethno-religious conflicts that could arise in the future if the trend is not diverted. The topic of today's presentation is the position that Slovak university students actually have on ethnic and religious diversity. Why this topic is important for our country at this moment, I will explain in my following slides. The presentation will be divided into two parts. I will speak a bit about Slovakia so that you have an understanding of how the country is ethnically divided, where it stands in terms of welcoming foreigners, and also how the political landscape is developing, which is not really copying the real situation. But with the rise of right-wing extremism in our part of the world, it's becoming a problem before it really has any realistic underpinnings. So, just to speak a bit about Slovakia, so Slovakia is a landlocked country. It's part of the European Union. It's in Central Europe. Our neighbors to the north is Poland, to the west Czech Republic, to the southwest that's Austria, then to south it's Hungary, and to the east it's Ukraine. We are on the border of the European Union in terms of neighboring with Ukraine, but otherwise surrounded by other European Union countries. We're also part of the Schengen area, which is very important with respect to immigration, because we're not the first country, except for the border with Ukraine, that immigrants from outside the EU would enter, and that's why also the the first stop. Immigrants and asylum seekers are not really a problem up to date in Slovakia. Slovakia is actually not a huge country, as you can see. Population is 5.5 million people. GDP in terms of a Central European country is not too bad. We're at 78th ranking in the world with GDP per capita. We're ranked at 176 world average. These numbers are important because, as you will see, Slovakia has never really been a destination country of immigration. It's rather been a source country of immigration for the last few hundred years, if you will. But with respect to the largest amounts of people emigrating from Slovakia, the largest share of emigration occurred in the beginning of the 20th century, and then during the Second World War, as unfortunately we were also a clero-fascist puppet state during the Second World War, but very negatively affected by the fascist ideology and also practice. Another wave of emigration occurred during the communist regime, which was in the 50s, and then largely at the end of the 60s and beginning of the 70s of the last century. Other than that, Slovakia is quite a stable country, and due to also our economic well-being, most of the people coming to Europe are not actually staying in Slovakia. They're just transiting, trying to get to the richer countries to the west and to the north of my country. What is really important with respect to economic development currently, that we have a very low unemployment at the level of under 5%, which is very important because currently, due to the demographic shifts in the population of the Slovak Republic, the labor market is actually not saturated by the labor force currently present in Slovakia. So we're actually dependent on immigration. Despite this fact, immigration has become a huge political topic. I will speak about it in more detail in a few slides. Okay, so just to give you some better idea about the ethnic composition of our country, over 80% of all people living in Slovakia are Slovak, so we're quite a homogeneous country. We have the largest minority are Hungarians to the south of the living in the south of the country. Then we have quite an extensive Roma population. That is probably the most ethnically distinct from the majority population. Then there are Czechs, there are Russians, Ukrainians, Germans, Poles, and Moravians living in my country. But you can see that their share on the total population is really negligible. 7.2% are unspecified. Okay. Now, with respect to religion, according to the last census that occurred in 2011, the majority of the country's population are Roman Catholics. Then under 9% are Protestants, 3.8% Greek Catholics living in the eastern part of Slovakia. They're less than 1% Orthodox. Quite a large proportion of people living in Slovakia declare themselves non-religious, and more than 10% did not give an answer to this question during the last census. Now, with respect to the real numbers of foreigners living in Slovakia, this is the realistic picture. We have 121,000 foreigners living in Slovakia, which is about 2.2% of total population, which you can imagine is not really a lot even for such a small country. Now, from the official statistics, more than half of these foreigners are employed. This is not to say that the rest is unemployed, because this is actually the statistics given out by the Office for Labor and Employment. So the rest which is about 50,000, almost 12,000 out of the rest are students that are not considered employed, and there are also people who run their own business, and they're not shown in the statistics of the employed people. And there are also spouses that are accompanying employed foreigners, and also their children, who are again not in the statistics of students, because students are considered only the university students in the available statistics. So most of the foreigners living in Slovakia are actually either employed or running their own business or studying. Another interesting information is that out of these almost 70,000 foreigners, almost half originated from a third country, meaning non-EU. The rest actually came from EU. Now, EU, you know that we have certain freedoms that also encompass the freedom of movement. So there is actually no restriction on the movement of people within the EU. That's why actually also when it comes to political topics on migration, this does not really address people migrating from other EU countries. So let's say the problematic would be probably 30,000 people who are coming from other, meaning non-EU countries. If I say problematic, it's not really problematic. It's problematic in terms of defining this issue as a problem in the programs of certain political parties in the last few years. Now, most foreigners employed in Slovakia were from Serbia, which is outside of EU, but not really considered culturally very distant. Ukraine, Romania is EU member, Czech Republic and Hungary as well. So you can see that most foreigners that are coming to Slovakia for living or for studying are actually from countries that are not really that culturally different than Slovakia is, and they're mostly European. Now, I borrowed this map that depicts the migration crisis from 2015, because that is actually the time when the topic of migration became a huge political topic in my country, as well as in other countries in Europe. Now, you can see that the main flows of refugees, because prior to this I was mostly speaking to economic migrants, but this is the map of the migration flows of refugees. Most people are coming either through the Mediterranean or through the Balkan route, where you can see Hungary, right below Slovakia, has a very high number of people applying for asylum. But the reason for this is only that Hungary, if the people were coming through the Balkan route through Serbia, was the first Schengen country that the people came in, actually the first EU country. And that's where the people, according to law, have to apply for asylum. But frankly, not too many people remain in Hungary, because Hungary is very a country that is very actually anti immigration, especially under the latest government of Viktor Orban. So they're not really welcoming any foreigners. And at this point, I have to say, if we want to make a correlation to economic development, Hungary is also suffering from a lack of workforce. But Viktor Orban, along with his counterpart in Poland, they're trying to pursue a new ideology called the illiberal democracy based on Christian values. That's what they call. And they, instead of filling up this gap of lack of labor force, they're trying to pursue some policies to enhance the demographic development, but at least in Hungary it does not work. Viktor Orban, he actually introduced very, I would say, very if you look at it, it should be effective because people usually respond to tax incentives. But Viktor Orbán introduced some incentives for the increase in fertility in the Hungarian population, in terms of introducing a tax holiday on income taxes for all women that have more than 3 children. So it's not actually working. That's my point. Okay, so refugees in Slovakia. Actually, last year we only had 178 applications for asylum filed asylum seekers originating mostly from Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Azerbaijan, and only 5 asylums were actually granted. There were about 20 subsidiary protections granted, so maybe 25 people actually were allowed to stay in Slovakia last year. Now, for the last 25 years, there were actually only about 1,500 people that either received the status of a refugee or a person with subsidiary protection that were allowed to stay on the territory of Slovakia. So the asylum policy is very restrictive, and the reason why I wanted to give you these facts, because now I will come to the point that immigration has become the main election topic. We've had a string of elections in the last few years because we had communal elections, then we had presidential elections, and then elections to European Parliament. So that's where all the political parties and also the presidential candidates were able to present their views. Now we have some very dangerous political players coming onto the arena. During the presidential elections, we had a new candidate, a newcomer to the political scene, although a very well-known person. He is actually a Supreme Court justice, which are this is not something really to advertise for Slovakia, but he's a very specific person. But his campaign was actually based on Euroscepticism and anti-immigration policy introduction with social media campaign arguing that he's a judge, so from unverified internet sources, he claimed that further 11,000 black people from Africa should be transported to Slovakia on the 1st of July of 2018, which is complete nonsense. I gave you the facts before. Now, his election result was in the first round was actually 14.4%, which is a very good result because we've had more than 13 candidates. Fortunately, he did not get into the second round. But we had another presidential candidate who is actually representative of a neo-Nazi parliamentary party. His main election slogan was that we will not allow immigrants to take over Slovakia. Election result 10.4%, which is quite scary because it does not have anything to do with reality, but people do respond to it. Now, during the European Parliament elections, which is also quite an important development, we've had the most progressive and liberal new party, a coalition of 2 parties, actually arguing as one of they had 20 main election topics, and one of them was fight against illegal migration, which is actually, in numbers, last year we had 2,819 illegal foreigners in the territory of Slovakia, so not a huge problem. But these were usually mostly people with expired work permits or expired residence permits, which are mostly coming from Serbia or Ukraine. So I'm not sure if I've even come to the... Okay, so the official strategy of the Slovak government, we have an official migration policy of the Slovak Republic with an outlook until 2020. And it says that Slovak labor market and the social system are substantially dependent on the influx of human capital from abroad, and thus there is a need for an active migration policy aimed at attracting talent from abroad. So this seems that this is actually our only way to sustain our economic development. And the current labor market situation is that we have 77,000 job vacancies that are unable to be filled by even unemployed people in Slovakia, because there is a very low mobility, and also structure of education is not really adequate. So according to the latest studies, among 115 firms, 38% of firms stated that the lack of workforce is the main cause for rejection of new orders, which has a potential negative effect on economic growth. Now, I will probably not, it will be in the paper, but anyway, I will just sum it up in maybe five sentences. So what we were trying to do, we were trying to look at how the Slovak university population actually perceives these issues, because this is the generation of people that will actually end up in government in a few years' time, because we're one of the largest universities, and many of our graduates actually do end up in the government in 10 or 15 years after their graduation. So this is the generation of people that will actually be the decision makers in some time. And I was actually inspired by the latest Harari book on 2021 lessons for the 21st century, where he has a chapter on immigration where he asks questions. So if immigration, yes or no? If yes, then under which conditions? And if no, what are the conditions, or why not? What are the actual fears? So we were trying to do a survey among almost 600 of our students. Most of them were female, then most of them were between 18 and 25 years of age. So now this was the first question, introductory questions, to see what they know. Slovakia actually is a signatory to all the international agreements on protection of refugees that apply to our territory. Only 27% of the respondents actually thought we were, and 31% thought we weren't. So there's no actually a knowledge base behind their opinions. Now, despite this fact, almost half of the respondents saw the current refugee protection regime in Slovakia as adequate. Now, I will just go maybe over 3 slides and then I'll finish. So the student stands towards accepting refugees who would fulfill the criteria for asylum. It's, I would say, even. We gave them the opportunity to express their views on whether they support, don't support, rather don't support, or support with additional limitations. And the largest group was actually this one, support with additional limitations, because there is some underlying fear, apparently. Now, we also asked them to specify conditions for acceptance. This is the interesting part. Only 120 actually responded. And that's the adaptation, obligation to work, increased scrutiny of these people, proof of origin, respect for our culture, obligatory language training, and stricter legal regulation. Whatever that means, we actually found out that we really need to do some constitutional lessons on our students too. Okay, now the main risks connected with immigration as they saw them was actually foreign culture, increased crime level. This is also something, I mean, when you read this is like reading the Supreme Court Justice blog. He spreads these fears and all this hatred, and actually people read it or hear it and they just take it over. This is actually all the, stereotypical or cliche, whatever, threats that are put out there, just, to stop at the increased crime level. There's very specific statistics on this. Last year we've had 1,300 crimes by foreigners committed in Slovakia. Most of them were Czechs and Ukrainians, and a very small number was actually violent crimes. Most of them were economic crimes, and all the crimes committed. There was a part of Vietnamese community also committing, but mostly economic crimes. So non-refugees coming from other cultures actually coming to our country are committing any violent crimes in our territory so far. So this is not a real threat. Now, security, increased unemployment level, threat of forcing other religion, not adaptation. Okay, so main advantages: new labor force, cultural diversity, economic advantages, brain gain, increase in tolerance, and cheap labor force. Now, this is very interesting because they actually say that cultural diversity is an advantage, but at the same time they're very afraid of it. Now, I would maybe stop at this. I was inspired by that Harari chapter. So he was actually asking questions: what values or features of their culture would our students expect the immigrants to give up unconditionally to actually be able to live in our society? Now, the most fearful thing would be that somebody would like to impose their religion and their culture upon our people. Dress code, religious dress code was seen as a big threat. Aggression, polygamy, discrimination of women, religious traditions and rituals, such as perceived by students as Sharia being such, extremism and vulgarity. So this is what the students are most afraid of, and they would actually like people coming to our country to give this up. Now, do you consider cultural diversity an advantage or disadvantage? 71% said it was an advantage, but if you ask in detail, they would like the people give up everything that's different from our culture. So they seem to be quite confused, and I will just wrap up by saying we were trying to do this survey, one, to get an overview where the students stand, but also to get them thinking, because the situation, the discussion in the country is still, on level yes or no, but not if yes, under which conditions and what are the actual fears. So we were trying to ask these questions, and the survey actually included more questions than listed here, to get the students actually thinking about what they're really afraid of and if the fears are real. And we are planning to do a new survey after several months with the same group to see, without giving them any new information, if they had a chance to think about it and maybe give some more, complex answers to these questions. And the only way out is education, that's clear. But how we do that, we're discussing this right now, and we're trying to also organize a workshop on maybe some cultural mutual, enrichment and understanding, and we will take this control group of the students who will actually take part in this workshop and give them the survey again to see how far they progressed in their perception of cultural and ethnic and religious diversity. Okay, so now this was the funny question at the end. Do you consider tolerance to be a key feature of a culture? 62% answered yes. But next time we need to really ask what they perceive as tolerance, because tolerance seems to go only one way in this surveyed group. Now,
if I could just ask you to wrap up, please.
Yes. So now the question that came last was whether they lived in a multicultural environment. 63% said no. So basically, they have no real personal experience. So all these fears and all these perceptions are actually coming from information that is spread, in this post-factual era, unfortunately, also in my country. So once we have the new sample from the a new survey after a certain time, then we will just try to see the difference, whether the education led to anything. Thank you
very much. I think.